So today I want to show you a few ways you can use drums to add movement and variation to your patches, using them as a modulation source instead of just an audio source. We will start with something basic, with using an envelope follower. Let me show you what's going on here. I have here a sampler playing a drum loop. Of course, this doesn't have to be a sample. You can program your own drums also if you want. Right, it will sound like this. If we have a look on the scope, you can see the levels, the volume of this loop. And what I want to do, I want to use an envelope follower to follow the amplitude envelope, the volume, the level actually of these drums, and output CV that I can then use in all sorts of ways, right? So if I use an envelope follower, in this case I have follow from vocoder, and have a look at this on the scope, you can see we get a green trace, which is control voltage, positive control voltage, that again follows the amplitude envelope of the drums. So let's see what we can do with this. I'm going to disconnect it from the mixer. I don't want to use this as an audio source. I want to use this only as a modulation source to add rhythmic variation to my sound. My sound in this case comes from VSEC, going through a filter, nothing too special here. Right, and I can use this modulation source to modulate the filter. Have a listen. Right, now we get the drums, or the amplitude of the drums, controlling the filter, the cutoff of the filter. Again, if I connect the drums, you can hear it quite clearly. Right, but again, I don't want to use them as audio in this case. I have here another drum loop, another sample. This one plays a halftime, so it will play twice as long as the first one. Right, it's a bit sloppy. Different things going on here. Again, I don't want to use this as an audio source. I want to use this as a modulation source. So I will use another envelope follower if I bring back VSEC. In this case, I'm going to use this to modulate the fold and the shaper. Right, so now both will play more or less together, or will add variation together. And since this, the second sample is longer, is twice as long, we will get here a sort of a turnaround. Right, again, adding variation, adding movement to the patch without using them as an audio source. But you can of course also use them as an audio source. Here I have the gate sequencer sequencing a few drums from VCV. I'm using also thorns to add some saturation, and the new CEQ from Nano, just as a nice compression here. Right, so in this case I'm going to use them also as an audio source. But what I'm doing here, I'm using Pack 6 from vocoder. This is a filter bank, so it's a bank, it's a collection of 6 different filters, each one set to a different frequency band. Right, I'm using the drums, and the nice thing about Pack 6, it has also an envelope follower expander that will output the envelope of each of the bands separately. So in this case, I'm using 2 bands. I'm using the lowest, and I'm using more or less in the middle there. Right, and this is modulating here another voice that I have. I have the string VCO going through reverb, after the reverb distortion indeed, then a filter. This is controlling the filter, the cutoff, the resonance, and the drive. So it will sound like this. Right, and you can hear the movement from the drums. Right here, if I remove this, this is without the modulation. Right, and again with, if we listen together with the drums. Right, and now everything together. Oh yeah. So the next idea is also connected to the envelope follower. Here I want to use drums as a clock source. So here I have a drum loop again. Again, it's a sample, but you can use any drums you want. right? And it has a rhythm to it, it has a groove to it. And I want to use this as my clock source. I want to have this groove going on to sequence all sorts of different things. Right, so again, what we will do, we will use an envelope follower. In this case, I also used offset from Bogue Audio because this sample was a bit too low, so I just amplified it a bit. You can use any other amplifier you want. Right, but again, I'm using the envelope follower from Bogue Audio. You can see the amplitude envelope here on the scope. This is the amplitude envelope of this drum loop. And now what we will do, we will use a comparator to extract the rhythm or some of the rhythms from this drum loop. So I have here probably the probe key or probably key from Impromptu. This is the sequencer I chose to use. It will sequence the FM operator. Later on, we will add also some delay maybe with tap dancer. And I have here a comparator. This is the comparator from VCV. So I'm going to send the amplitude envelope to the comparator, to the A input. And now I can, me or the comparator can compare this A input, this signal with offset signal, right, with a sort of a threshold, if you will, that whenever the drum sequence goes above the threshold, we will get a gate that then we can use to gate or to clock different modules like sequencers. So I'm going to use the A greater than B output, again, when the drums are greater than the offset. And now it's all about finding the sweet spot, right, raising the threshold until we get the rhythm we want. Already you can see the gates here on the scope. And again, you will have to tweak this depending on the drum loop you are using and to find the sweet spot for you. And I'm going to use this to gate again to run the sequencer. Just raising the threshold or the offset until I find a nice spot that I want, a nice rhythm. Right, if we listen to the drum loop. Right, we get sort of this rhythm. We get this groove, and this is sequencing. We're using this as a clock source, as a trigger source, as a gate source to gate or to trigger or to clock our sequence, right? Which is also quite interesting. Right, I have here another sequencer, the gate sequencer from Impromptu, again sequencing a few drum modules from VCV, and I want to use this clock source also to gate or to clock this gate sequencer. So what I will do, I will use R gate also from Bogue Audio, which is a clock multiplier. It's also a clock divider. In this case, we will use it as a clock multiplier to multiply the clock. And again, because it's so wonky, we will get an interesting result. Right, so I will send this to the clock multiplier, in this case R gate, and maybe multiply this by 2. Right, I have here a kick, and I have the clap going through a modulated delay. Right, I can multiply this by 4 even. Right, just experiment with the different rhythms. Again, experiment with the threshold of the comparator that you are using. Experiment with different drum loops. Try and use all sorts of different wonky rhythms. Okay, so this idea is using drums as a modulator for a vocoder. This can create quite unique sounds. You will see this also in a second. Here again, I have a drum loop. And also here, I'm not even going to use this as an audio source, but only as the modulator for the vocoder. So what I have here, I have 2 classic VCOs tuned an octave apart. I'm mixing them together with some noise. It's always good to use an harmonically rich sound source as the carrier for the vocoder. So this will go to the left and right inputs here on the vocoder. This is the carrier input, right? It will sound like this. Basically a drone. Right, and here we have the modulator, maybe I will zoom in a bit, the modulator input, right, again, in this case it will come from the drums. I have only a mono signal, so I'm going to use just the left input here, and have a listen. Right, so now the drums are vocoding this drone, again, this is the original, and this is with the drums, and now of course we can change the sound. Right. Oh yeah. Listen to this. Again, the original. And now with the drums. So you added, this added rhythmic variation, but also created quite a unique sound. You can change the number of bands. The more bands, the more clear it will be. Very nice. Now I have an additional tip for you. If you want to use like a drum loop or any loop actually, and you don't know the tempo, the BPM of this loop, you can use the end of cycle together with the clock multiplier basically to generate a clock and to sync the rest of your patch. So again, I'm using R-Gate here from Bog Audio as a clock multiplier, and this is clocking the Turing machine, which I have here another voice with sequencing. Let's add a bit of the delay. Sine VCO, reverb, delay, and then distortion, of course. Right, and it will be in sync with this loop, with this vocoded sound, because again, I'm using the end of cycle with the clock multiplier as my clock source. Right, I have here also more drums, in this case without a vocoder. More drums, sending them also through a comparator for another layer, which I love to do. Oh yeah. Okay, the last idea is to use drums to ring modulate different voices. This can work really nicely also with just a simple triangle wave or sine wave, as you will see in a second. Right, again, here I have a drum loop. And also here, I'm not going to use this as an audio source, but only as the modulator for ring modulation. So I have here a triangle wave, a very simple triangle wave. This is going to the carrier input of the ring modulation module, again, Bog Audio. Right, and the modulation or the modulator input is coming from the drums, so it will sound like this. Again, using the drums to ring modulate, in this case a triangle wave, right? Quite interesting. I'm going to add some delay with Tap Dancer here. Right, now, if you want to do this in hardware, for example, or you just want to try a different approach, this ring modulation is basically amplitude modulation, but instead of using a VCA, you use a voltage controlled attenuverter, which is also a type of a VCA, or a voltage controlled polarizer. Right, so all you need is a attenuverter with voltage control. In this case, I'm using the one from Count Moduli. Again, I'm using a sine wave. In this case, it goes also through some distortion. And again, the modulator, you can see the CV input is coming from the drum, so it will sound like this. I will solo this. This is now just a sine wave, or the sine oscillator, I should say. Right? So using drums for ring modulation can also be quite interesting again, and it will change drastically according to the sample you're using, or the drum loop you are using, or the drum sounds themselves. I have here some things going on. I developed this patch a bit. I have a kick drum going through the Briatus. I have a copy of this going through Tap Dancer. I have a snare. Oh yes, a snare going through Chronoblow for some glitch. Oh man, and I have here the FM operator playing basically random notes. Again going through a reverb and distortion, but the reverb is also gated. I'm gating here the reverb, it will sound like this. Oh yes, indeed. And you can hear how much rhythm this ring modulation sounds, right, without them. With, oh yeah, indeed. Okay, very cool techniques. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you try them out, there is so much to explore. If you find something interesting, feel free to share the results with me. You can tag me on YouTube, you can tag me on Instagram. I would love to hear your results. Thank you again for watching. Cheers.